Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hot Pot. I'm Princess Mae Visconde, the host of the Hot Pot. And today you can see that I have a crew with me. We'll be talking together about culture and identity. But before we get started, we'll start off with introductions. Iris, could you start off?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Princess May, for having me. So my name is Iris. My pronouns are she and her. Just a little bit about me. I'm the current program coordinator for NICO's Chinese Health Coalition. We are based in San Francisco, California, and we are happy to be here today.
Thanks, Iris. Happy to have you. John?
Hey, thank you, Princess May. My name is John Kaleekal. My pronouns are he or they. I am based in Oakland, California. I work at the Public Health Institute for a program called the Bridge Initiative. I'm a data and evaluation project manager, and for that program, we are focused on supporting California hospital emergency departments to better treat opioid use disorder. That's my main job, and then I also serve as the president for the Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus for Public Health, which is a caucus group under the American Public Health Association, which puts on a lot of scientific programming and professional development events for Asian and Pacific Islander public health professionals.
Awesome. Lots of great work. Gaomomee?
Hi, everybody. Once again, thank you, Princess May, for inviting me to be on here. My name is Gaomomee. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, studying biology with a minor in medical anthropology. Right now, I'm a summer intern for OCA, placed specifically with the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, and I'm excited to be here.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So excited to have you all. Yeah, we're talking about culture and identity. And I think when we think about culture and identity, I think the first thing that comes to mind are my parents. So really wanted to hear about kind of your family's origin story. So where are you or your parents from? And we can start with John.
I currently live in Oakland, California, like I mentioned earlier, but I was born and raised in Kansas, in the Kansas City metropolitan area. And if people don't know, Kansas City, it splits between two states, between Missouri and Kansas. And so I grew up on the Kansas side. And so I was born in the US. However, my parents are both immigrants from India, and they are from the south part of India called the state of Kerala. And they actually came over to the US at like different points. My mom, she actually immigrated by herself first she wasn't married to my dad yet. Her first husband actually passed away, and so she was a widow, and she had already had given birth to my sister, and so she immigrated as a widow to the United States because being a widow in India is actually really difficult. And so she was living in the city called Chennai, which is in the state of Tamil Nadu. And she had immigrated and raised my sister for 13 or so years, and then actually wanted to marry again, and then asked my grandparents to coordinate an arranged marriage, which is really common in Indian culture. And my dad was already living in India at the time, in the state of Kerala, which is where we're ethnically from. And they had basically exchanged letters to each other at that time. This was in the early 90s, and like agreed to have a marriage, and like an arranged marriage. And so then my mom actually brought my dad over like 13 years later or so, and then now I'm born. So that's kind of like my parents' origin story as far as like where they're from, and then eventually, we all ended up in Kansas.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing. I know we'll probably dig a little deeper later on, but it's always so interesting to hear, where our parents come from and how that kind of leads to where we ended up. Like you ended up in Kansas and now you're in Oakland. So definitely dive a little deeper in a bit. Iris, could you share a little bit more?
So I'm from East Oakland, California. So in 2022, Oakland, California was actually rated the 8th most dangerous city in the US. due to its high crime rates, such as prostitution, gang violence, and robberies. As for my parents, they are from a small village in Vietnam where there was no electricity, no nearby hospitals. My parents, they're actually from Hoi Phong, Vietnam. So that's North Vietnam. So where they identify as Chinese. So my parents are what you may know as boat people. So because of my parents, they were able to get a ride on a boat because of my past grandma's abilities to read the tides in the water. So they were able to win like a one-way ticket closer to freedom, so away from the Vietnam War. So this led to my parents eventually going to Hong Kong, where they were immediately placed in refugee camps. So in the refugee camps, they faced many levels of discrimination because they weren't Chinese enough, even though we were completely Chinese. And it's just a matter of like where our backgrounds are different. So eventually my parents were sponsored to come to Stockton, California, and relocated to San Francisco in a small multi-generational studio with all my aunts, uncles, and cousins.
Yeah, thanks, Iris. Yeah, my partner actually, his mom is also Chinese Vietnam refugee. So it's interesting hearing that story because it's actually more common than I thought. Like my first time hearing it was hearing it from my partner, and now kind of hearing from you. I was actually talking to one of my colleagues. I was like, is Iris Chinese? Because like your last name, right, is Vietnamese. And so I was like, oh, maybe like, your parents are both people, Vietnam refugees, but are actually Chinese. So it's great hearing that story. So thank you.
Yeah, and just something funny I learned today was that like our family, like that have Quach, they all have different variations of Quach because of immigration. It depends on the person who helped you spell your name. So like, because the person that helps my parents were Vietnamese, so Quach is the Vietnamese spelling. And then for the person that helps my uncle, he was Chinese. So it's Kwok, which is the Chinese spelling. And then my aunt, for some reason, hers was, I don't know what spelling it is, but it's like COK or something in that variation. And it just means all the same things, but different variations. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, that is. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's, names change when you immigrate to new places, and it's always like, okay, who is helping you change your name? Is there an actual, like, there's no way to look back, I guess, because there aren't records of what our original names are, because that's kind of how my last name has changed and what it actually is, in the Philippines. So that's so interesting. Thank you. Gaomomee, do you want to share?
Yeah, so for me, I'm Hong. My parents were actually born in Laos and alive during the Vietnam War as well. And then they became refugees in Thailand. And then they met in the refugee camps, actually, and that's how their relationship started. Then they had two of my sisters before 1980. I believe, and that's when they both immigrated over here to the United States. So I'm a first generation Hong American, and on top of that, my parents were originally in California, but then in the late 1990s, they both immigrated over to North Carolina just due to like the factory jobs that were present and like how like it required less of like an educational background to like be able to get a job.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear. I think we're all first generation, technically. I know like first generation, second generation, I get a little confused, but all of our parents are immigrants to the US. And so we're technically first generation. So it's so interesting to hear everyone's kind of immigration story or their parents' immigration story and how that has changed and altered. And I want to go back to you, John, because you mentioned that you ended up in Kansas and then ended up in California, and kind of just wanted to hear a little more about that transition from Kansas to California, or what life was like in Kansas, and then how that kind of involves in like, your upbringing and who you are today.
Yeah, I know. I think living in California, I'm like very normal in that I meet a lot of like Asian people, and they're like, used to seeing other Asian people. I think people assume I'm from here because there's like such a high population of South Asians in general. But yeah, I grew up in Kansas City, and I was there through my whole life through college. I went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And actually, I've been in a few places between Kansas and California. So right after Kansas, I did a Fulbright program to South Korea, where I was there for 2 years. And I lived in the city called Sejong, which is like an hour and a half outside of Seoul. My first year, I taught English and lived with the host family. And then my second year, I worked for the Fulbright program and lived in Seoul. So I had this international experience right after undergrad. And then after that, I actually moved to Chicago, where I did graduate school. I studied public health and business, and so I lived there for 3 years. And then after Chicago, I made my way to the Bay, and I've been living in Oakland for coming up on 3 years or so. So that's kind of like the general map of places I've lived so far in my life. But like kind of thinking about your question about like, how did Kansas influence me and like, the person that I am today, it's it's a predominantly white space. I don't think that's surprising probably for anyone. And so I definitely, as a kid, definitely didn't really understand like race and my dynamic in terms of my relationship to my own identity in ways that I do now. And I remember like as like in kindergarten, I have this distinct memory of like going to school, and I was like one of the few only brown kids and only people of color in my school. And I have this distinct memory of like as a little kid asking my mom like, oh, when am I going to turn white? Like just like because I was seeing like everyone else around me was white, and I'm like, why am I different? And she was like laughing in the car, like, what? Like, don't you see me? I'm like not white. And she was like, you're not going to turn white. But as like a little kid, I like just like for some reason did not understand that like what? Like, why am I different? And so I think like, like a lot of people who grew up in predominantly white spaces, there's, maybe a period where you don't really identify or understand your own cultural identity until later. And I think that really only hit me probably in college when I became more aware, also just like politically aware of life and also race, and like thinking about like experiences I had growing up that like, oh, that didn't make sense at the time, but now I understand why I felt different and why things like stood out to me in those ways. And then also, I am queer, gay, and like I've known about that for a long time since I was like in middle school or so, but then also just understanding like how that interplayed with living in Kansas in a really conservative, space, as well as being Asian. I've really only been able to understand those things and how those things intersect in my early 20s when I was in college, and then also after college. And I'd also been given the opportunity to leave Kansas and like live in Korea for a bit, and also live in Chicago and be in spaces where I was able to actually see people who looked like me, not necessarily in Korea, but more so in Chicago, where I was able to be around other similar people who were also queer and Asian, and understand that part of my identity more, and think about, oh, like in Kansas, I didn't have that, It was a very stable place. I had a really like, solid group of friends growing up, and people I still stay in touch with, and other queer people, but I never really had like queer South Asians and people in my life. And so that was things that I sought out later, and I'm really glad I have, and it has helped me just sort of generally feel really confident in my identities, being both queer and South Asian, and wanting to make sure that other young people who grow up in these spaces also kind of have that have resources and spaces to talk to. And I have a lot of like sympathy and empathy for that experience.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. And I really something that really resonated with me, and I almost had the opposite experience where you like grew up in a predominantly white space and then, had the opportunity to leave Kansas. I grew up in Hawaii, which is predominantly very diverse. And so I'm Filipino, and everyone I knew was Filipino or some type of Asian. But I went to school in Indiana, which is a predominantly white space. And it was then that I was like, oh, there are people who don't look like me necessarily, but also there are things that I didn't notice, about my culture, or kind of, explored a little more until I moved elsewhere. So I'm really glad to kind of hear that when you left Kansas, you got to explore your identity a little more and try to figure out those spaces and how to navigate with people who are South Asian, with people who are queer, and find those people to kind of be the backbone and that support that you need, that you didn't necessarily find growing up. So and really love that you share that, like now that you can be like make that space for people who don't have that, like you didn't have it growing up. So kind of love seeing how what you've experienced growing up is really playing a part in the work that you're doing and your identity today, and the spaces that you get to be part of. So Really appreciate you. And then Gaomomee, can you share a little more about that too?
Yeah, so for me, as I mentioned, I am Hmong, and I feel like being Hmong, it is like an ethnic minority that's like often overlooked. One of the biggest person that like is a representative for the Hmong community right now is of course Sunny Lee, who's like the Olympic gymnast. Like I think like thanks to her, like she has brought like a huge like perspective lens to the Hmong community, and just kind of like I think it was a really big event whenever she won like her gold medal at the Olympics. Additionally, on top of that, I think I also grew up in like a rural town. Luckily for me though, it is like one where like Hmong people like do like settle in. And so like I've always like grown up surrounded by like Hmong peers along with like other peers as well. And on top of that, I think one thing that I really love about being a part about my community is like getting to like I guess be so close with my extended relatives. There was always like a religious ceremony that required extended relatives to be present and a part of. So it's always great to just be a part of that community and like growing up with your cousins and like seeing your aunts and uncles almost every weekend. I remember seeing like relatives now, they're always like able to remember me because apparently like I was like very outgoing when I was younger, and it's nice just being able to being remembered by people that like you don't even remember anymore, I guess, if that makes sense. But just like that, and there's always like that support on top of that. And I think it really helped me like pursue like my goals. I go to like, as I stated, like Chapel Hill, and while like it is a predominantly white institution, I do believe that like there's still diversity on campus and being able to find that space. For example, I'm a part of the Hmong Student Association of Carolina, but also on top of that, I'm a part of the Asian American Students Association. And I really enjoy being a part of both programs just because it's really allowed me to like find more about myself and also just to connect with peers who have similar identities and similar experiences on top of that. And also just being able to plan programs and enjoy each other's company, I think is one of the best parts.
Yeah, thank you. There's definitely a theme here, and it's community. I think when you finally find your people that you can connect with, it really goes a long way. Iris?
So growing up, my parents, they actually like made us go to Chinese school. So all of my siblings, I have 3. So we all went to Chinese school to learn about our culture. And like my mom not being able to speak English, like Cantonese was naturally a first language at home. So being young, I was surrounded with a lot of culture, but it just made me kind of sad because as I got older, like when I graduated from Chinese school, I kind of started losing my native tongue. And so what made me felt like I was starting to get back into my culture, it was like giving back to my community. Like being in Oakland, California is such a melting pot. I'm so privileged to be living in such a melting pot. Like I have Laos food right here, Ethiopian food on the other side of the lake. And I have like Little Saigon, like a few blocks away from me. And Little Saigon is just like a Vietnamese community near like 2 blocks away from me, and maybe like a mile away I have Chinatown, Oakland Chinatown. So like having these places help me like relive my culture in a daily basis when there isn't like holidays like Chinese New Year or like the Chinese version of Day of the Dead where we go visit our loved ones at the tomb and we just do tomb sweeping. That's like how I relive my culture occasionally, but on a daily basis I visit these places and I realize like I am so lucky to be surrounded by all this food, all this love, and all this support from my community.
Yes, thank you. Again, the theme is community and finding those ways to connect back to, your people and your culture and how that really influences your upbringing. And I think we talked a little bit about this already, but talking about intersectionality, so how you identify, there is Chinese, Hmong, South Asian, Indian, or, like as a woman or being queer, how does that kind of impact your life or kind of the work that you do? And so I'll always start off with Gaomomee.
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the most important thing about like the intersectionality of like my identity, my main identity is like, obviously I'm Asian American, but I do identify as Hmong, but also on top of that, being a woman. And so like in the Hmong community, like I won't shy away from the topics that it is like more patriarchal. And so on top of things like that, like it is kind of like hard to like navigate through that of like the patriarchy and like like just being told like there's a place for you, like as in like you're kind of like restricted in topics like that. I think one thing that my parents did really well though, despite like being like traditional, is like they did like encourage and like push and support my sisters and I to like reach and go towards higher education. I'm thankful for that. Because of that, like I'm able to access so many more opportunities. And like while I still face like such items such as like the patriarchy and stuff, like I feel like I have other avenues that I can go about to kind of prove them and like to kind of break these barriers down.
That's awesome. Can I have follow-up question to that? I know you shared a little bit more about like the patriarchy and how your parents helped push you to pursue higher education. Is that something that isn't typical?
I think one thing that's important is that like my parents being like immigrants, like they didn't and they weren't able to pursue higher education, but my father seeing it as like a stepping stone and like something that is needed in America to like be able to pursue higher paying jobs. He believed that like his children should have the opportunity. So while he was able to obtain his associates, like he wanted more for his children. And I'm glad that he does, because some of my extended relatives, they don't have that same opportunity with like that support from their parents to like go towards higher education. And so I'm thankful for the opportunities that I've been given. And like, I'm thankful my parents do support me and like want me to go towards and obtain like my bachelor's degree.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I'll go to John.
Yeah, so I know I talked a little bit about some of the intersections of my identity that most stand out being queer and South Asian. In terms of my experience in the world, like I tend to be like South Asian first, at least to other people. I think, when you see me and hear my name, it's just very easy to identify like this person's not white, like there's just like that, and then and I've been told, and even when I hear myself speak, like once you hear me speak, people are like, oh, I think he's gay too, just because like I have like a gay voice, and then I'm just very open about being queer and gay. I have been since middle school, and yeah, so I'm very comfortable with both of those parts of my identity, but it's like, where those things like intersect has been something I've just continued to explore, especially I think I mentioned earlier, like from my 20s or so, because like I'll be in spaces, like I remember going to like my first few Pride events in Kansas growing up with like one of my high school best friends. And like, yeah, even though it's queer and it's amazing to experience like queer spaces like that in a space like Kansas, I still didn't see many people of color at all, and so it was just like seeing feeling a little bit of lack there in terms of like, oh, I there's certain things that I experience that just doesn't even resonate within the queer spaces that I'm in currently. And so I think that's like definitely motivated me to want to seek out those types of communities. And in Chicago, I was a leader for this group called I2I, or Invisible to Invincible. It's a queer API Pride group of Chicago. And that was amazing because I was just around so many other people who also are from the Midwest typically, and could process experiences that just really, only other like queer Asian people can just get, and like that, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but that just other white people and other queer white people just wouldn't really understand, as far as like, family pressures that we have around coming out and expectations, and talking about marriage in a way that like is just, when you think about marriage, for example, within a lot of Asian communities, it's such a high pressure topic. And when you add your sexual and gender identity to that mix, it makes it even more complicated. And so there's just things that I've been able to process as I've gotten older and been able to be in community with other people like me that have just helped me further develop and understand that intersection of my identity. And just understanding how racism impacts me in the way that I am also queer, and also how I forgot to say it to everyone, happy Pride. It's June while we're recording this, but also currently in the US, like there's just so much anti-queer and anti-trans legislation that's getting passed right now. And then when you also add that to just ongoing racism that has like been a part of the U.S. since its inception. It can be really hard out here for queer people of color, and so it's important for me to be open about my identities, so that other people can see that we exist, and to also invite other people who are similar to me to also be in community, because I find I'm myself the most when I'm with other queer Asian people. And so it's just important for me to just continue to put myself out there and to normalize my identities and the intersection of those things, and be explicit about those parts of who I am, because they make me the person that I'm proud to be.
Very well said. Thank you. Yes, happy Pride, and thank you so much for sharing that. And then Iris.
So for myself, so despite my Vietnamese last name, I identify as Chinese American, also known as like American-born Chinese. So culturally, so I and my parents and ancestors' wildest dreams, all of the 8 to 5 jobs, working for barely minimum wages, having to rely on government assistance, and living as low income. Like, yes, they left America for freedom, but most importantly, they left for me and my siblings to have a better future. So although my parents don't say it to me directly, this is how they express their utmost love for me and my siblings because of their sacrifices. I'm able to say that I'm a first-generation college graduate from UC Berkeley. But I do want to mention, like, growing up and being Chinese, it used to hurt me being low income. Like, not a lot of people talk about like the socioeconomic differences. Like, a lot of times you see shows like Bling Empire and like other major shows that like shows off how rich they are. Like, as I do watch it, but it's just like it's hurtful sometimes, because you realize like there's not a lot of representation when it comes to like being low income, and like explain to your friends that you have to apply for like food stamps and like low income housing and like Medi-Cal for your parents. Like, it's not something that you really talk about. Like, for myself, like, because I live at home, I have to help my parents apply for these services because they don't know English. And it's kind of funny because I have 3 siblings before me, and it kind of just been passed on. Like, these duties has been passed on from my oldest sibling to my second oldest sibling to my third oldest siblings, and last but not least, me. So I just feel like sometimes like it's not really talked about, it's not really represented. So with the work I'm doing, I'm happy to be serving the low income Chinese community.
It really just speaks to what you've all mentioned, and how, again, your upbringing and how you identify really impacts the work that you're doing and who you are today. And I kind of want to dive a little deeper on that. And maybe Iris, you can start. I know you mentioned, growing up Chinese, identifying as Chinese American, growing up low income, and even helping your parents navigate the public benefits and those systems. And the work that you're doing at Nikos is very much that same navigation for our community members. And just would love to hear how you kind of made that connection from, your upbringing and then going into the work that you're doing with Nikos.
So, wonderful question. So my identity definitely fueled me to give back to my community. So like being in Oakland and San Francisco is actually not quite that far. It's only like a 20-minute difference without traffic. So funnily enough, but my parents eventually moved to San Francisco. They were based in Chinatown. So when my siblings were born, they were born in Chinese hospital, and Nikos is actually an acronym. It's an acronym for all the parent organizations that create Nikos. So the C in Nikos is actually Chinese hospital. So that's where, like I mentioned, my older brother and sister were born. And cool fact, Bruce Lee was born there too. So yeah. So but my organization, I feel like it's kind of like a full circle moment, because I'm like serving the Chinese community, whether that's through translation or facilitating like in-language workshops or interviews. But also I felt like I'm giving back to like the same people that my parents first came in here as. Like, they didn't have anything. They had no education, they had no money, they had no background really, like no footing in America. And that's terrifying. So like by like our other programs, we also have like Medi-Cal enrollment. And that's really important when you come to the US, because everyone needs medical insurance. Unfortunately, not all of us have universal healthcare. So even little things like that helps a long way. And it feels like we're helping the low income housing situation as well. And also I feel like it's not really like, let me think about this. It's not really monitored, and there's not a lot of representation. So I'm happy to be here today to talk more about these programs. Like we also do other projects with like UCSF, where we interview like low-income Chinese elderly about how we can increase like health access. Because with the rise of anti-Asian hate right now, a lot of people are like, the number one thing is not how to get there or not being able to afford it. It's how will I get there safely? And that's like a major hurdle that's not talked about. And we see it all over the news, and it's quite frightening because it's nearby us. Like it's probably like a few blocks away from us. And like it's not the same anymore. It's not like, oh, it's another state, we're safe. It's more like you have a chip over our shoulder, and we have to be careful and watch out for each other, whether we're like Chinese, we're Vietnamese, we're South Asian. Like we have to help each other and serve allyship.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to follow up kind of on that and what you shared and all the work that you're doing now, how did you make that connection kind of, in college or growing up, the same connection that you just made about how, we immigrants obviously need access to healthcare insurance. We need to make sure that they're getting to places safely. Did you make that connection, growing up, or is that more when you started to like go to college and started interning and working at Nikos?
Growing up, it has always been a thing where I always want to give back. Just a little bit about myself. So in my high school internship, like I went to high, which is like a bunch of immigrants, believe it or not, like whether they're directly from the country or they're like the kids of immigrants. Like it's crazy because like that school, like although it has a really bad reputation, it definitely like shaped me to who I am. Like I knew I wanted to give back to my community because being there, like everyone was actually almost everyone was low income there, and it's like, and it was frowned upon because we were like considered like the bad school because that school was a school where if you got expelled or suspended, and that was the school you went to. So that's why we got a bad rep. Yeah, and so that influenced me to like give back to my community because it's not fair. Like for me, I'm not a bad kid, but because of where my zip code is, I have to go there. And it's like, you just go in, you go out for me. So that shaped me to who I am. And like, because of my high school upbringing, like I eventually did a program with Forward Together where we did like comprehensive sex education in Oakland schools because we had no funding. Like sex education was not available. Like people were getting teenage pregnancy, people were like having non-consensual relationships. And with my program, we were able to do that. And like I'm thankful because it shapes me to who I am. And now that's why I'm at Nikos, and I'm proud to be there because I'm able to help people on a wider scale versus a smaller scale.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that reflection because it's, if you ask yourself, when did I become an advocate? It's when you grew up, like when you were translating for your parents, when you were at high doing that work. And love to hear that you're continuing to do that in your current role. And so, Gaomomee, I know you shared about kind of growing up in that community and how it's kind of influenced you, like having your family there and having that support, and now being at UNC and being able to be part of these organizations and kind of plan programming around that. How does that connect with, how you grew up and the work that you're currently doing, and then the work that you want to pursue post bachelor's degree?
Yeah, so like I had mentioned earlier before, it is like more like a rural town. And so like one of the biggest things between that is like, again, like language, like during like taking my parents and stuff to like visit the doctors, and like the language barrier is one of the biggest barriers present there. And I guess like that's something that I always had to help with too. Like I am actually the second youngest out of 7 siblings in my family, so like beforehand, like my older sisters and them were like doing the translation, and like Iris said, like it is passed on, and eventually, like unfortunately, like I would say my Hmong isn't as great as it should be, and or in comparison to my older sisters. So like even then, like having to like help translate medical terms to my parents whenever visiting like a family physician and just letting them know about their symptoms, or like translating for my parents for the physician to understand like their symptoms. I think that's one of the biggest things that like you can kind of see, and it just prohibits people from like health equity. And I think that's one of the things that kind of like inspired me to reach and like to go towards higher education. Hopefully I will become a doctor. That's one of my goals and aspirations. Originally, I did want to be a family physician because that was one of the things I noticed and I felt like I could provide for my community, like being home and like being able to understand home patients and like their symptoms. I think that would be very beneficial. I do now want to change tracks to like become an OBGYN, but even then I feel like my background has really like influenced me and like to always like seek out community. So like I mentioned earlier, being involved with like the Hmong Student Association of Carolina or the Asian American Student Association. I think that those are both two very like pivotal and influential organizations that I've been a part of and like have really like helped me become like a community builder. I think that's really important. Like I had mentioned, like program building. I think that that's very fun, getting to see people come out to events that I've created, getting to see like my peers like enjoy events that like I feel like are important to me and that they also enjoy. I think that that's really something that like I think it makes you feel like more fulfilled. And I also wanted to mention that like sorry, the background thing again, of course, like if it wasn't for like the fact that I grew up so like tightly knit with like my relatives and like my immediate family, I think that like I would have been more like less willing to seek out those communities in my like I guess like during now in my college experience, even like in high school as well.
No, thank you for sharing. It's definitely what I'm gathering from what you're sharing is finding communities that feel like home for you, either creating them or just having that upbringing and having it already built into your family. And so I love that you shared that, and obviously how your upbringing being a translator, same as Iris, is what's influenced you in wanting to pursue becoming a doctor and all the work that you're doing. So thank you for sharing that. And then John, I know you shared a little bit about this already and really finding communities, in your 20s that are queer or South Asian, and how that is where you are your best self and you're most, I guess, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but most alive because that's where you're most comfortable. I really love to hear how that kind of those intersectionalities, those experiences, your upbringing really influence the work that you're doing today. I know you shared that you want to create these spaces, you want to be very vocal about them and share those so that others know who you are and that they're not alone. So really love to hear how you kind of discovered that or ended up where you are now.
I'm thinking a lot about how, exploring my identities has sort of helped me be the person I am today in so many parts of my life. I briefly mentioned I currently work in my professional day job in like the substance use realm at a very systems level job. Like we work with hospitals across California. I don't really work with patients, but a big thing that we navigate in this topic is stigma against people who use drugs and addiction, and working with like physicians, for example, and clinicians to address their own internalized stigma against people who use substances. And I think my own exploration of my identities, queer and South Asian, has just really helped foster my own skills and ability to have empathy for people. Just being able to understand not feeling seen or heard by other people within whatever larger community or space I'm in, and being able to understand that experience. I can't identify with that patient population, but I can definitely relate to the experience of not feeling heard or feeling like you don't have a space for you that is not optimal for just being yourself. And so that's just brought a lot of sympathy to be able to show up in my work, to be able to think about the work I do at a systems level with a lot of empathy and care for people. Prior to my current work in like the substance use realm, when I was in Chicago and doing my master's program in public health, I was working at a HIV treatment and prevention clinic, doing research there, and we focused on adolescents and young adults. And that work really hit home because I worked with a lot of like queer and trans youth in Chicago and young people. And it was really amazing to be able to relate to experiences that they had as young people navigating sex and concerns around their sexual health and relationships. And so it also just allowed me to relate to that content in a way that just, I think, made my work stronger, because like, you know, when a straight colleague said something that I'm like, oh, you can't just say things that way, like that's just not going to translate. I was able to, you know, flag that for the group and be able to say like, you know, this is actually probably how we should approach this topic better, or in a way that actually makes sense to people. So it's helped me a lot in professional settings. It's helped me in also my interpersonal relationships, being able to understand my family's experiences. I think a lot of reflective diasporic people end up like processing their own family trauma and like understanding their parents in a different way, that their parents themselves haven't done that work and maybe don't have the capacity or the resources to do that work. But it has allowed me to have more empathy for my own like parents' experiences, just coming to a country where they didn't know what was going on and doing their best and navigating these complicated systems that are just frankly really hard to navigate, and even hard for people like us who grew up here, you know. And so I'm able to understand people better. I think that's like the big thing, is just like empathy, understanding people, and you know, providing that care and in those settings that maybe don't seem as like explicit or something that you wouldn't think of.
That's what inspires me most about, I think, our generation. You know, we came from immigrant parents, immigrant families, and obviously our parents had to navigate moving to a new country and kind of assimilating in a sense. And then obviously they had to deal with, you know, some trauma around that. But then in our generation, we're dealing with the trauma that they experience and kind of the trauma of being daughters, sons, people of immigrant parents, and how we have to help them continue to navigate the world that, you know, that they chose, but so different from what they grew up with. Even though it's the same world that we're growing up in now, we also have that little piece where it's like we're also in the world our parents grew up in, and it's a different world from the, you know, living in the US and the world we're living in. So really love what you shared, John, about how you have that empathy, you have that understanding because of those experiences that you have personally, but also the experience that you've learned from your parents as well. So really excited for all of the great work that you all will accomplish. I know we're still relatively young, and so just hearing how much work that you are doing, how passionate you are to make a change and kind of be there for communities the same way people were there for you growing up or weren't there for you growing up. So really excited to see where you all end up and how things go. I don't have any other questions. Well, I have a ton of questions, but there isn't enough time. I think I need to like speak with everyone individually because I really love just hearing all of your stories and where you all come from, how everything led to where you are today. And I know that our story is unfinished. So I'll ask a final question, and I think it'll be perfect around culture and identity. And it's really looking at legacy and what hope for the future. So what is your hope for the future, and what legacy do you want to leave?
I think the legacy that I want to leave behind is to still have that softness, like that kindness when it comes to like people who come from different walks of life. Like our parents, like although they're not perfect and they don't say things that they're supposed to say, but it's a matter of like having that benefit of doubt, like understanding that they come from a different world than we do, and understand that like although the trauma they gave us is not on purpose, but it's our responsibility to like heal from it. I know trauma is unfair and it's like not purpose, like it's not placed on you out of voluntarily, but it's important for us to like understand that not everything is meant to be taken personally, and sometimes it's important to give benefit of the doubt. So although someone may act out and like yell at you, it's important to understand that like maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're just like don't know how to express themselves. So giving that benefit of the doubt, like through therapy for myself, like it helps me understand that like maybe it's just not me, it's just a you problem, you know? So it definitely took away a lot of like anxiety, like, am I good enough? Why did this person treat me this way? Like, did I do something wrong? Like, it stopped taking the blame from me, and instead it's just like, I hope that person heal. Like, I hope that person have that time to self-reflect. So I think having that softness is not weakness. It's just a way of being an empathetic leader. And also like, it also sets grounds to like a new generation where we learn how to be a better version of ourselves. So not to repeat the unresolved intergenerational trauma that we had.
Yeah, I can go. I think I have my thoughts formed now. So in terms of like legacy and thinking through the future, like generally, there's like, generally I want to be remembered as like, someone who's very loving, both in my personal relationships, but also within my community and my family and the larger spaces in which I exist. And that's probably a really core part of just what motivates me in terms of like, how am I showing up for life in a loving way. And so that's something I hope that can, be remembered about me. I hope to be remembered as someone who cared about, the larger community that I'm a part of at all the different intersections that I've mentioned, being my sexual identity, my gender, my racial identity, and having supported making those spaces safer and more accessible for other people to come after me. That's really huge for me. And so creating spaces that are sustainable, that honor where everyone's at to the best of our abilities, and showing up for people and my communities in a way that feels loving. That's kind of the word that I keep going back to, but that's just really what is most important to me in terms of the future. I'm involved in all these different projects, with public health and other groups and things, and all that's been wonderful. But I think what gets me through, even the difficult parts of, managing different parts of those projects is coming back to like, I want these spaces to continue to live on after me, and to, hopefully be spaces that exist that I would have benefited from if I was, when I didn't have those spaces before.
I think what Iris and John said in terms of like legacy and what they hope to leave behind is like a good summarization. I love how they both like added like the thing about like kindness and loving. I think for me, like it's similar to that as well. I want to be known as like a community member that like added and like that benefits from the community, but also like adds benefits to the community as well.
Amazing. Thank you all. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for joining me on the show. Again, I wanted to leave space at the end to see if there was anything that you all wanted to share that I may not have asked, or something that was lingering that you wanted to mention but didn't have the opportunity.
Oh, I guess I can answer one of the questions. I felt like I didn't have time to like articulate it. But the stereotype question about like a cultural identity. So I think a stereotype that is something really damaging is that like the Asians are like the model minority. So like being the model minority, like it may sound like it has like positive overtones, but it's actually quite damaging to the Asian American and other people of color, because the model minority myth pits people of color against each other through like oppression Olympics. So the idea that like marginalization is a competition to determine the relative weight of like overall oppression of individuals or groups are based on identity. And I just think it's really unfair, because we all come from different walks of life and we all put in the work. And it's not fair that like one is better than the other just because like is more favored. And that's really damaging. In actuality, we should all be in unity. And because like we all may be very different, but we're all quite similar. It's just a matter of skin tone. And that's not fair. Like we're in like 2023, like we need to make better progress. We need to show up for others. It doesn't matter like if it's different or it doesn't relate to you. Like we need to show up and stand up for those who don't have a voice.
Just thank you, Princess Mae, for this podcast and uplifting voices like ours, and so many other people that you've been producing into. I think it's an awesome podcast. So I just want to thank you for all this.
Yeah, well, thank you all for joining. Thank you all for being open and sharing your story. I know that's sometimes hard to do, especially if it's near and dear to your heart. So really appreciate you all.
Thank you, Princess Mae. This was actually quite healing. I can speak for many others. It's like a healing circle in a way.
Yeah, we need some more of these. I learned so much about all of you that I didn't know before. Now I'm like, I might email you all after, and like we can, because some of you are in the Bay, we can have like coffee. Or hot pot. Yeah, we can all gather and have hot pot. Gaomomee,
Message you.
You can come with us. Do a little hot pot outing.
I know a place.